Welcome to the Talking Precision Medicine podcast, brought to you by Genialis. I'm your host, Raphael Rosengarten, CEO and co-founder of Genialis, the RNA biomarker company. On this podcast, we discuss the future of healthcare and health technology, and how advances in data and data science are fueling the next industrial revolution. If you have not already, please subscribe to the show on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to podcasts. And for more information on Genialis and our unique approach to AI-driven precision medicine, please visit our website at www.genialis.com. That's www.genialis.com. Now, on to the show. Our guest this episode is Charles Fisher, co-founder and currently Chief Scientific Officer of Unlearn.AI. Unlearn has been a leader in the advancement of digital twins as a tool to drastically improve the efficiency of clinical trials. Not only a visionary scientist and trailblazing entrepreneur, Charles is fearless with his hot takes, so sit back and enjoy this freewheeling conversation. It's my pleasure and privilege today to welcome Charles Fisher, the founder, former CEO, and current Chief Scientific Officer of Unlearn.AI. Charles, welcome. Let's jump right in. Tell us about Unlearn. What's the mission and problem that Unlearn tries to solve?
At Unlearn, we are focused, we say that our mission is to advance artificial intelligence and use it to eliminate trial and error in medicine. We have been pushing the boundaries of really what's possible with AI in a lot of ways. I think more so than people maybe are aware of and people within the, probably, I'd say we're one of the deepest AI kind of research companies within the sort of medical space. We're focused on creating what we call digital twins of people. And a digital twin of a person is a computer model that allows us to forecast any aspect of that person's health at any point in the future. That's what we'd like to be able to build, sort of like a crystal ball that you can use to predict anything about anyone on earth, at least when it comes to health. And right now we sort of are bringing that to market, the initial kind of technology, where we aim to make clinical trials better. Effectively, if you think about the clinical trial vision, where that was going, the idea was that we could take a person like Charles, I enroll in a clinical trial, then we create a digital twin of me, and we use it to predict what would happen if I got a placebo. And the idea is that if you could predict that perfectly, then you could actually run clinical trials without placebo groups at all. And so that is kind of like the long-term vision. Of course, there's a whole bunch of things where the trials we run are mostly randomized today, but we can get into the details if you're interested in that over the course of the podcast. So
let's dive into a couple of these concepts a little bit. So who benefits then if you can do this? You can create a digital twin, a faithful digital twin of people enrolling in clinical trials so that you don't have to have a placebo arm. Sort of what are the arguments in favor of that approach? Who are the various stakeholders who win in this scenario?
So number one person who wins is the patient. The person participating in the clinical trial. The number one reason that patients give for not wanting to participate in trials is that they don't want to be randomized to a placebo group. And you take the flip side of that, people are, especially now, really thinking about turning to clinical trials as a care option. So the idea is that a lot of times we're targeting indications where there aren't great treatments that are available, or maybe you're talking about people who have already failed the first line therapy and there aren't other options available to them. And they're looking to clinical trials to get access to new experimental treatments. And then they get into the clinical trial and they don't get it. And so the number one person who would benefit from this are the patients themselves. Then the second group of people who benefit are the pharma companies. Right now, people are spending, I use a kind of round number, which is typical clinical trials cost about $100,000 per patient. I've actually heard estimates that it's much higher than that. Depends on the particular disease area you're talking about, but it's a lot, right? And it can take years to enroll enough people to actually reach your enrollment target. So if we can reduce the number of people that a company needs to run a clinical trial by half, it dramatically cuts both the cost and time of clinical research. And if you do that across all clinical trials, that does it for one. If you did it across all clinical trials, it totally transforms the clinical trial landscape. I think one of the things that I would love to see coming out of not just what we work on, because there's a bunch of companies trying to develop different types of technologies to make clinical trials faster and cheaper. I would love to see all of these things come together to where we could democratize clinical trials. Like, why is it that if you're a small biotech company, you need to raise so much money, you need to go partner with a big pharmaceutical company to run your clinical trials because it's so long and so expensive. If we can bring down that cost and timeline, all of a sudden you open up the possibility of running these trials to all companies, not just big companies. And I think that would benefit the entire medical research community.
No, that makes a lot of sense. I'm quite certain that people out who don't live in this world have no idea how inefficient the clinical trial space is and how many really promising medicines and promising biotech companies end up failing due to issues like you're describing and challenges with enrollment, just running out of money because it's too damn expensive.
I mean, 20% of clinical trials fail to ever meet their enrollment target. 1 in 5 just never find enough people.
And then I don't know if people sitting at home are doing the math, but if let's say it is 100,000 per patient, if you need 500 patients in your randomized phase 3 trial, if you can cut that in half, you're saving 25 million. Did I do that math right? And that's conservative, right? So that's a lot of money. It's
a lot of money. Yeah.
So I think that's a really kind of excellent mission. I want to think a little bit more about what constitutes a digital twin then. I mean, I love this analogy of sort of a crystal ball where you can kind of gaze inside and see how a patient's going to respond in any health context. But given the state of your technology, what actually goes into the digital twin? What are the data and sort of what are the ways that that digital twin can be queried, right? Like what can you ask of?
Sure. So today, the models at least that are released are kind of indication specific. So we might have a model for Alzheimer's, we might have a model for multiple sclerosis, things like that. We have been working on kind of R&D projects to circumvent that and to build one big giant foundation model that would allow us to predict anything for anybody, regardless of indication. It's still early.
Yeah.
So kind of the way that I would describe it is as analogy to the AI systems that everyone kind of is aware of these days, something like ChatGPT. So if you think about ChatGPT, you have a generative model that is trained on a large sort of corpus of text. So you would have this huge amount of text, you train a model, and that model's predicting, it says, given the words that I've seen so far, approximately, it's saying, what is the next word, right? And so then when you actually go to use it, you type in a sentence and it says, given these things that I've seen, let's predict what would come after. And that's kind of how it works, right? And so the models that we use are actually quite similar. We use autoregressive generative models. So they're not transformer-based models like ChatGPT. They're actually things that we invented, but they are autoregressive generative models. We take sort of this large corpus of historical patient data and we train this model on it. Then when you get a new person, you collect information from that patient and you prompt the model with that new information. You ask it to predict what would come afterwards. So instead of thinking about like predicting the next word, we predict like the next visit to the doctor. So you would predict the next visit ahead. And that way you can predict all kinds of stuff. We're focused primarily today on like the macroscopic measurements that you would make from a patient that you would take it at the doctor, right? So for that, things like typical blood test results, the things that vary from one indication to another. So there's all kinds of measurements that people use to measure a patient's symptoms, and they vary from one disease to another. Could be brain imaging, things like that. So we predict those types of things. We're not trying to think about modeling every interaction between every gene or every chemical in the cell. That's totally impossible. But we're trying to think about predicting all observable qualities of a patient.
What I love about what you're doing, and honestly, one way that contrasts with the boulder that my company is trying to push up the hill is, it sounds like you're modeling on data that will be collected for virtually every patient, at least with a given disease or indication or syndrome or set of symptoms. Right. Again, the observable stuff. It doesn't necessarily require a new kind of assay.
That's correct. Yeah. No new assay.
Where'd the idea come to you to build a digital twin company? I'd love to hear a little more about the origin story. Love to understand where the name Unlearn comes from. First of all, it's such sort of idiosyncratic but unique name. And on what cocktail napkin did you write the business plan?
So it's only idiosyncratic if you think that we were founded as a healthcare company, which we were not. Right? We weren't interested in creating digital twins of patients. We weren't interested necessarily in medicine. We weren't interested in clinical trials. Those are not things that we were focused on when we founded the company, right? So my background, I'm a theoretical physicist. Actually, it's funny. So just the other day, after they announced the Nobel Prize going to Hopfield and to Hinton, my postdoc advisor from Boston University Physics Department sent me a text, and he was like, "We're finally mainstream physics now. We've made it. We're part of the community." Because for years, people were telling us that we're like not real physicists or whatever. Anyway, so I'm a physicist, and I had worked at Pfizer, and so I had some experience working in kind of healthcare space. But my co-founder, Aaron, he's a pure mathematician by training. My other co-founder, John, he's a theoretical physicist who was in like particle physics. And we all met working at a virtual reality company, right? And we were doing machine learning at this virtual reality company. So when we started Unlearn, we were much more like DeepMind or an OpenAI than like a vertical focus, like we're going to solve this problem in medicine. And what we effectively were interested in is, we started in 2017, and we had kind of a couple of high-level thoughts. So the first one was that the future of artificial intelligence would be driven by generative models. That was thought number one. 2017, by the way, pre-Transformers paper and all this stuff. So we were quite prescient about that. But we were also a little bit contrarian. So we said, everybody is working on images. So how do you generate images, or how do you generate text? These are the only two research problems that anyone seems to be working on in the AI space. And personally, I don't find it that interesting to think about how can I build AI systems that automate tasks humans can already do. I just don't find it that interesting. It's not to say it's not important. It's other people are working on it. I want to focus on how I can create AI systems, invent new types of things that extrapolate beyond human knowledge. I want to create things that solve problems humans cannot yet solve. And so we were thinking, effectively, how could you build generative models for science? That was the original idea, generative models for science. And we had a list of application areas when we went to go pitch our first investors. Like digital twins of people was one of them. It wasn't like not on the list. It did exist, but so did simulating the climate. Like we were talking about like climate simulations and weather modeling and all kinds of other things. And we didn't really narrow into the medical space until about 6 months actually after we started the company. So the first 6 months, we really were doing just pure machine learning, and we weren't sure what it was going to apply to. And then we narrowed down into sort of the medical space after about 6 months, and narrowed into the clinical trial space probably another 6 months-ish after that. It took us a year probably to get to these things, kind of what we're in. Then yeah, so it's kind of a progressive narrowing towards like focusing on these areas in medicine.
It strikes me though that you certainly picked a space that has a lot of inside baseball. Like there's a lot of stuff you kind of have to know to navigate healthcare, and this clinical trials are like, a hyper-regulated space. Was it the market opportunity that attracted you, or the opportunity for disruption, or do you have like an early advisor who kind of steered you that way? Or, were you sending out market feelers? Like,
I worked in clinical trials when I was at Pfizer, so it wasn't that unusual for me. I had experience in the space, and like our first year, what we did is we did a bunch of projects with Pfizer. I went back to all my colleagues and we tested some stuff. Some stuff worked, some stuff didn't work. A lot of it was experimentation to nail down kind of the specific area. And again, I actually think that I'm just reverse of how everyone thinks that I am, actually, in terms of like what my motivation would be or all of these things, is that I'm not a clinical person. I worked at Pfizer and I started this company, but I'm not a clinical person. I'm not a trialist. I'm not a biostatistician. Man, somebody called me a biostatistician once, and I was like, whew, oh, I'm not those things. I'm not a medical person. I'm an AI researcher. I'm a physicist and AI researcher. I think of those things kind of as like my main component. So I've always been reverse motivated, which is that my view was that medicine has so many unsolved problems that trying to go and tackle those unsolved problems will force us to invent new kinds of machine learning. That was the idea. By the way, not just unsolved problems, but unsolved problems with a big market and big social benefit, which honestly, to me, maybe the social benefit maybe matters more sometimes than the market. So it's like, okay, I've got big social benefit. I've got a big market. I've got these big unsolved problems that are going to require us to invent stuff. And here's a way that we can marshal a ton of resources to go after these problems and build like the next generation of AI systems that are going to be able to be sort of like a super intelligence is what we've been thinking about, but like a narrow super intelligence. Again, it's trying to solve these problems that humans haven't been able to solve yet.
Right. Not Skynet, but something socially useful. That makes a lot of sense. And, you are not the only person I know in the field who really does come at this from a pure physics or AI background. There are others. You probably know Brandon Allgood is a buddy of mine. And I think that, frankly, people with your background are maybe in a better position to invent the tools we actually need than people who are entrenched.
I'm certain we are. Yeah.
Yeah, who are really entrenched and are constrained by the limitations of how things are done, right? Like,
yeah, the same thing. Like, I worked at Pfizer for 1 year, and I thought that was the right amount of time. It was an amount of time where I learned an enormous amount of stuff in that year. I mean, it was also my first job because I was on like a professor track. I did multiple postdocs after grad school, right? So that was my first industry job, and it was like a fire hose of information about what it means to have a job and like how pharma works and all this kind of stuff, right? So I learned a huge amount, but I also didn't stay so long that I kind of like started to see things their way, if that makes sense.
You never became an insider.
Yeah, it's right. It's the right amount of time.
No, that makes a lot of sense. Well, let me ask you about another kind of transition. So you're a physicist, now clinical biostatistician. I'm teasing. You're not one of those, but you're also a startup CEO, for a while, and you're still helping run the startup. Comment on that a little bit. What was that like having to, did you keep doing science? Were you kind of full-time fundraising and managing people? And, like I said, I mostly answer the phones and take out the trash. That's kind of my job.
Oh, okay. So I got in trouble a lot. I got in trouble all the time. I hate rules, so I'm like generally a rule breaker type of person, but I can't not do science. I can't not do it. I just can't. I mean, it's still the case that I think the majority of Unlearn's patents, even the things that are like recent, as of like earlier this year, I'm one of the primary inventors of, I think, the majority of our patents. I still would write code, but I would like joke. So like at the end of, I forget when this was, 2022, 2023, I don't remember. One of those over the holidays, I would do a lot of my coding over the holidays, because we've kind of shut down, and I just spent a few weeks there where I didn't have my other responsibilities doing stuff. And I signed all of my GitHub commits in my dog's name, Blanca. Blanco's invented all of these things and wrote all this code because there was like a joke because the board had told me I wasn't supposed to do that kind of stuff. Okay, by the way, all of that is stupid. One of the things that I learned, and I've talked with a bunch of other founder CEOs about these things, being a founder CEO is different from being a CEO. And it's something that I actually think that I didn't understand at the beginning of the company. A lot of investors and other people and executives don't seem to understand. Being a founder CEO is a really special job. It's a really, really special job. I think founders, even first time in particular, haven't figured it out because you think that you have to conform to some sort of mold. There's some sort of job called CEO, and you need to figure out how to do that job just like everybody else does it. So you need to become like Tim Cook or something, and you don't. It's your company. You started the company. You can define the roles however you want them to be defined. It's your company. So, I certainly caved to some of the pressure that I was put under by various people around me to stop doing science. And if I could go back and do it all again, I would tell those people to go pound sand. I'm going to continue to do science. Oh, what are you going to do to me? I would 1000% do that. I think that, anyone, if you're starting a company, I think one of the most important things that you can do is actually, before you even start worrying about what your product is, I don't think that's the right place to start when you start a company. Not to start thinking about what your product should be. You actually should start with yourself and think about what it is you want to do. What do you want to be doing 5 years or 10 years in the future? And then you should actually kind of design the company around that. I think pretty strongly in that direction. Design the company around kind of your vision for yourself. And then same thing, when you recruit people, you should be recruiting people these are the people I want to be working with, not just because this person was an executive at some such and such company. That's a terrible reason. Hire the people that you're going to be want to work with for the next 5 to 10 years. I think that's certainly like a lesson that I learned in starting the company is I wish I would have thought more about what I want and a little bit less about what everybody else wanted. A lot less actually about what everybody else wanted.
Yeah, I would echo that. Absolutely. I would echo that as a first-time founder. And I actually didn't start as the CEO. I started as the head of product and moved into the CEO role. But in the early days, you've got the examples of everyone else you see out there who seems to be crushing it. And then you've got like the archetypes of the Steve Jobs and the, Tim Cooks and the Bezos is, the sort of iconic tech CEOs who are frankly once in a generation. Like, doesn't make sense to even try to imitate them. Plus, they're mostly billionaire jerks.
Well, but they're also all completely different from each other, actually.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
Yeah,
Like Tim Cook and Steve Jobs are like opposite people.
that's right.
Yeah.
And then, I'm curious to know what your experience was with this, but like as soon as you take investor dollars and then have like a professional board, you feel like you've got these new masters. And at least for me, it took a long time to grow into this notion that, we had great investors. They were founder friendly. They were there to give advice. But yes, I guess legally, Delaware speak, they were my boss, but they weren't telling me what to do. They were just telling me what they thought I should do. It was up to me to build the company in my vision.
Yeah, I listened to so much stupid advice. Yes, over the years. So much. I did not have to. Yeah, that's very true. This kind of the same, we raised a lot of money, right? We raised $135 million in venture capital and from a lot of really, really big time investors. But one of the things I used to tell the management team before we would go in to present to the board is I would say, hey, as we're preparing our presentations and stuff, you guys each spend, say, 10 hours a day, every day, 10 hours a day thinking about the company. And the board members spend 10 hours per quarter thinking about the company. They don't have the same type of context that you think they do, actually. They have a way less context. So if you're thinking about giving a board meeting or giving a board presentation, that means that you actually have to step way, 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 way back, zoom way out and provide this huge amount of context for people because they're not in the details every day. But I never took the reverse side of that where I was like, hey, these people aren't in the details every day. Maybe I shouldn't listen to every suggestion they make. They don't know everything. How could they? So maybe I shouldn't be listening to these things. So I definitely made that mistake for sure. I think every first-time founder makes like the same exact sets of mistakes. It's just,
And it's amazing because there are blogs and books that tell you what not to do and stuff, but we're going to do it anyway. And that's just how it goes. Right?
Yeah, you kind of need the scar tissue yourself. Yeah.
I think that's right. What I like to say is that I have to fuck everything up twice before I really learn the lesson. So
yeah.
So one last kind of question in this realm. You just announced a transition to the chief scientist role. I'm excited for you because I can feel from you how excited you are to at least have that mantle. Was that a long time coming? What was that process like? But the real question is just, that's awesome. What are you going to do with your new mandate, with your new title?
So it was a long time coming. People asked me this actually at the company when I announced it internally, which was a while ago. It's like early this year. It took a long time to do a CEO search and do all that kind of stuff. They said, like, how long have you been thinking about doing this? The company is 7 years old. And I told them, I've been thinking about doing this for 7 years. My co-founders, of course, know because they were there. And like the early investors know because they were there. It's like, I didn't want to be CEO when we started the company. We tried to recruit somebody else to come in and be CEO at the founding of the company. It didn't work out. And so I ended up doing it. I did it for all of these periods of time. But as I got pulled out of being able to do the R&D that I want to do, there became this dissonance more and more between like what it is that I'm doing every day and what it is I want to be doing. It's the same thing. Like I used to tell people, I'm like, when I go introduce myself at a party and people go, what did you do? I don't tell them I'm a CEO. I don't go, I'm a CEO. I don't say I'm an entrepreneur. I say I'm a scientist. If you want to know what my identity is, what it is how I think about myself, I think about myself as a scientist. And so it just became too far apart. So I notified the board and the company and everybody in like March, and then the actual transition happened in September. So it took a really long time to be able to go, and you have to, first of all, you have to do a search for the search firm, right? And then you hire the search firm, and then you do the search. So
you say a really long time. I don't think that's such a long time, but yeah, I understand.
6 months, it felt long. It felt like a long time. I mean, what do I want to get back to? I want to solve intelligence. That's what I've always wanted to do. I want to solve intelligence. And so I'm interested in trying to get back into real AI research where I'm going to be able to do that. So it's been about a month now since I stopped being CEO. I'm just reading. I have to like restart my brain and like get the brain to work again. So it's just like, I'm going back to like basics to like be like, get brain moving. Like I have got like computer science and physics textbooks, and I'm like rereading these textbooks and just trying to get my brain back into thinking mode. It's going to take a little while, I think.
I get it completely. I get to weigh in on our science, but if you ask me to actually like design an experiment, however many years of this I've been doing, I have to catch up on that literature for sure. Who is the new CEO?
Steve Hearn is our new CEO. So he was our chief commercial officer. He actually joined the company right exactly the time that I was stepping down. So we ran a search and he was kind of an internal candidate. And he comes from that commercial side where he's super extroverted. And at the same time, he has a PhD or I think a PharmD or, so he's got the background in kind of the space. So yeah, I think he's going to do a good job.
I hope you're enjoying this episode of Talking Precision Medicine, powered by Genialis. We'll return shortly with more of this insightful conversation. As Charles highlighted in today's episode, data quality is crucial in machine learning, and so is data diversity. Underrepresentation of ethnically and geographically diverse data is a long-standing challenge in our industry. That's why Genialis partners globally to make our biomarkers not only robust, but widely applicable. At SITC last week, we announced a new partnership with India-based 4BaseCare to address representation gaps and develop biomarkers that serve global populations. This was one of several updates we shared at SITC, where Genialis also co-authored a poster with Hotspot Therapeutics demonstrating the utility of biology-first machine learning classifiers to find patients most likely to respond to targeted therapeutics. For more information, click the link in the description. If you enjoy this show and would like to hear more episodes with more great guests more often, there's one thing you can do to help. Subscribe. Please follow us on your favorite podcast streaming service and leave us a review or comments. Thanks, and now back to the conversation. I want to turn the conversation a little technical again. I want to sort of dive into the AI ML stuff a bit and some of the application space. One of the cool things to me about the Nobel Prize announcement, the Nobel Prize in Physics that went to sort of the invention of kind of class of AI, is really in your wheelhouse, which is a different kind of AI than I think most people have become familiar with sort of the ChatGPT. Talk a little bit about the flavor of machine learning you guys work with and why it's well suited to this problem. And if you are a generalist listening to the podcast, we're going to get a little technical now, but feel free to dive in because I love this stuff.
Sure. So we work on a type of model that people call energy-based model. And the typical way that physicists think about energy-based models is going to be through this idea of an energy landscape. And so effectively, close your eyes and kind of picture it. You have this like rolling landscape of hills and valleys. And what we're going to do is like effectively at the bottom of every single valley, you can imagine there as being like a box. And inside that box, we're going to put a memory. So then what you're going to do is we say, okay, well, we want to be able to remember certain types of things. Well, you kind of wander down towards the bottom of whatever it is the closest valley is. You open up a box and you pull out this memory. And so these are these types of models that they're energy-based models. Hot field networks were called associative memories, and there's various versions of these things now. And so we've kind of adapted this idea to how you can make predictions for what's going to happen to a person in the future. And that basically looks like sort of wandering around this landscape, going from valley to valley. So it's like you walk to the first valley, you open it up and you see what happens. And you get these instructions, like, go walk 2 miles to the east and 11 miles, south or something like that. And then that will take you to a new valley and you open it up and you pull out that next memory. And here when I say memory, it's like a set of measurements for a particular patient. So at the bottom of each one of these valleys, you have all of these different boxes. Inside of them are predictions for what would happen. And then I can make a prediction over time by wandering from one valley to another.
Do you ignore the peaks?
We don't, no. So you do have to cross them. That's the annoying, frustrating part about the whole thing, actually. This particular area of machine learning, why it's maybe less suited to the scale that you've seen from things like ChatGPT, is because you have these peaks and you have to figure out how to cross them. And the higher the peak, the longer it takes to cross. And so that ends up using a lot of extra compute. So you're using all of this compute trying to climb up this hill and then cross this peak, instead of just sort of like tunneling from one valley to another valley without using all that compute. So it kind of burns a little bit of extra, not super efficient.
Got it. Very interesting. So I'm interested to go back just briefly to the question of the data. In these sort of memory boxes, you've got measurements from patients, and you're training this on data from actual patients. Where are you coming by the data? Do your pharma partners have the medical records of X thousands of patients with Alzheimer's or MS, or have you had to partner with hospital systems or clinical groups? What's been your journey to collect these data?
It's a mixture. So the first thing is that we've built up a really big internal data set now. And often within the healthcare space, you see an anti-correlation between the size of the data set, the quality of that data set. So you have this kind of option of either getting like a really small, high quality data set or getting a really big, shitty data set. And it's like, which of these two things do you want to choose? And I've always taken the view that you need to do machine learning from really high quality data, that you don't want a really big, shitty data. It's that it has to be high quality. You can't fix quality with big, but it still needs to be big. So the quality thing led us to saying that we need data from clinical trials themselves as the foundational element of our data for two reasons. First of all, like if you were to look at my medical record, you'll see that I'm 40 and I've been to the doctor like 6 times. You don't have that kind of rich follow-up that we need. And the other thing is that when you think about a clinical trial, a person goes in, they're in the hospital sometimes 4 or 5 hours at the site, getting this battery of measurements. So you have this huge, rich amount of information about a patient that you don't get any other way. So we had to start with clinical trials. The problem is that they don't have very many people in them. Clinical trials, maybe a couple hundred people. So we've now built up internally a data set that's predominantly clinical trial data, and it's a little bit over 1 million patients worth of data. And so you think about how many clinical trials we had to aggregate together to be able to go from studies that are like a few hundred people up to like 1 million patients worth of data. It's a lot of clinical trials that we've aggregated. There's a ton of publicly available clinical trial data. If you can just go out, do the work of going get it. There's also data that you can just purchase, which we've done. The hard part is that you now have data from 1,000 studies that you need to harmonize into one thing that you can actually, that's the hard part. That's the hard part. Yeah.
This sounds a very familiar problem. We've done a similar thing with a particular kind of class of molecular data and hopefully the clinical records. And it was the same thing. Either if you go out into the real world, it's a dog's breakfast, right, of real world data. And so you want to try to find data from as many, as controlled a setting as possible. And solving the harmonization problem of 1 million different patient records is, it's putting real work in. It's refining the oil into something useful, right?
Yeah, it's one of the things for like companies like us. It is part of the moat that you have as a company, because if somebody else wants to go out and do that, like you can't do that faster, really. Like not you maybe a little faster, but not much. Like it's the hard work of actually going out there and finding all those things and doing it. So that's kind of the base data set that we start from. And then, we do things where we have a model that's trained on that data set. And if you're a pharma company and you wanted us to fine tune that model on your data, we can do that. Or if you want a whole new indication, a custom model that's just built for you, we can do that too.
So I love the explanation of the AI, kind of the landscape analogy. But, you guys have had to go to regulatory bodies like the FDA and explain how this works and get them to give you some thumbs up to, deploy these tools in clinical trial practice. What are those conversations like? Sort of how technical are they? What is the actual vehicle by which a unlearned digital twin gets put into practice in a trial?
Yeah, they've been highly technical conversations, but they've also been easy. I think there's been a pretty negative, I'll get to the actual point, but I have another point to make first on my soapbox, that there's been a really negative impact of the broader consumer-facing AI things on how pharma and the life sciences industry and medical research industry are thinking about AI and what they think it means for regulation. And so I think that the recent bill that came up in California is a good example, where we had this bill that was going to regulate the kinds of models that you can train and how they are trained. And Governor Newsom, when he vetoed it, made an exceptionally good point that it is not the kind of model or the data it's trained on or how it's trained that presents any risk. If I can have the world's model trained as big or on any whatever data it is, if it's just sitting in a box unconnected to the internet in my basement, it presents no risk to anybody. Okay, all of the risk is in how that model is used to do things. And the regulators within medicine, at our experience, 100% understand that. And they are focused on not regulating the underlying models, but on regulating their context of use. And they are 100% focused on how will your proposed application work, which is fantastic. The problem is that, again, within the industry, right, it has been polluted by this idea that somehow the model architecture or its data set matters. That has not been our experience with the regulators. We focused 100% on saying, imagine there's a black box model. This is like how we approach the regulators. There's a black box model. You don't know what it was trained on. You don't know what it is. Its architecture. It doesn't matter. But you have it, and you can estimate how it performs by looking at some data and measuring, evaluating its performance. And then you can take its predictions and you can use them in a certain way within a clinical trial. And we said, if you follow this procedure in which you have a black box model, you evaluate its performance and you use it in a certain way, you can provide guarantees, mathematical guarantees on the properties of that clinical trial. And we were able to get a full regulatory qualification out of that, which was a long process. Like why I say it was easy, it took 2.5 years and cost like $1 million or something like that. So it was a lot of effort and work, but we didn't encounter resistance from the regulators. It takes 2.5 years and it costs that much money because it's a bureaucracy and you go through its process and that's just how it is. But we didn't encounter any resistance from the regulators really at all. And we're continuing to work with both the EMA and the FDA on some of these questions. And the key thing is that we focused a lot of our effort on designing the particular use case such that it had really low risk. We wanted to design a product where even if our model was terrible, suppose there was like a bug in our code and it just like spit out a bunch of garbage, it wouldn't hurt your clinical trial. And so we can design cases like that, use cases, then the regulatory pathway is easy.
But, ultimately your product is intending to either cut down on or eliminate the need for, say, the placebo arm. If you do that and it's garbage.
Cut down and eliminate are very, very different things. Yes.
Sure. I'm saying cut down and maybe one day you won't need the placebo arm. But let's say you're just cutting it in half, right?
Yeah.
That's going to change the statistical power of the trial. And so hopefully your model isn't garbage because you want the trial to be powered, right? So let's talk about the statistics a little bit, since that's a hat that some people confuse you as wearing. You guys put out a really, I think, thoughtful white paper on something called a PROCOVA, which is a statistic. Can you explain that a little bit? And is that sort of the general output of your clinical application then? It's sort of a statistical number, or is it something different? Am I misrepresenting how it works?
Well, if you were to get our product, you're getting a software product that's going to be a full suite of things, from your clinical trial design to giving you predictions to then helping you get these analyses out. So it's like a whole software suite of things that covers your entire clinical trial. Underneath that, right, there are analyses that are being done and that are powering the things that you see. And PROCOVA is one of the many statistical methods that we've developed. That's one of those analyses. The basic idea, if you can think about how our analyses work, is the way that I think about it. I like to describe things in ways that I think you don't need a lot of math to understand. It's funny, as a theoretical physicist, you learn a really healthy disrespect for math, actually. It's like, the math is all just extra fancy stuff. So when we run a clinical trial, it's randomized. So the studies we work in today are still randomized. We do work in single arm studies, but that's only if you were going to run a single arm study anyway. So it's better to compare it to digital twins than compare it to nothing. But most of our studies are randomized. So the idea of this is actually really, really simple. Okay. I'm going to take a patient and I'm going to randomly assign them to the placebo group. At the same time, at that first visit, I'm going to create a digital twin and I'm going to predict what would happen if they got a placebo. And at the end of the study, I'm going to go and I'm going to observe they got a placebo, what happened? And I'm going to have a prediction. Here's what was predicted would happen. And I'm going to measure how different those things are. Okay. That's it. And I'm going to measure, is my model on average biased in some way? Is it predicting that progression on placebo is too fast or too slow? I'm going to measure that in the study population itself. Then I'm going to go and look at a patient in the treatment group. I'm going to say, okay, well, I'm just going to take that error that I've measured on my placebo group. I'm just going to correct for it. So I'm just going to look at the difference between a patient, what happened when they got the treatment, which I observed, what was predicted if they got a placebo, and then I correct for it given this measurement of my error in the study. And I end up getting an unbiased estimate of the treatment effect. And again, there's a whole bunch of math underneath it, but that is how it works. So all of our methods, you measure the error in the real placebo group. You then measure the treatment effect and correct for the error in the treatment group. So what happens is basically before the study, in order to think about how many patients you need, we have to do a calculation, which is how large does your placebo group need to be in order for us to be able to get a reliable error correction. And so the better and better our models get, the smaller that can be. So we do this calculation beforehand and then we apply it in the study. And there's a whole bunch of things we can do to make sure that you can't end up underpowered, for example. Like halfway through the study, we could run an interim analysis in which we look to see if we're underperforming. And if we are, then you just roll back up to the original enrollment. So there's a whole bunch of things that you can do. It's like we tried to design the least controversial and the least risky possible use case. And we said that should be the first use case. We have a whole bunch of other things that are way more powerful, where you can get giant sample size reductions, giant increases in power, but they require you to make some assumptions that maybe are more controversial. So we apply those things to earlier stage proof of concept studies, which, by the way, are also usually extremely limited in power anyway, because people are running very small studies. So you get a lot of benefit. And then we use these really, really super conservative approaches when we're talking about like phase 3 studies.
Oh, that makes total sense. One of the things I hear a lot, especially from people in the healthcare business, right? People who at hospitals, people who work with doctors, for example, is that if you want your AI tool to be adopted, you can't create more work. You can't make them deviate from their existing workflows. You can't require them to learn something new. And so I love this idea of trying not to actually rock the boat as a way of making this sort of a no-brainer. It's like there's all upside. It's not going to be controversial. It's not going to,
Yeah. The other thing that's interesting, we've been working on this now, in particular for like the last year and a half or so, but I think that there's a lot of unrealized upside in the whole clinical trial industry for people to just care about user experience. It's incredible. All of these people are like medical directors or whatever running clinical trials. They all go home and they open up their iPad and they use modern software. And then they walk into their pharma company in the morning and like everything is Word documents being sent around and faxed around. And then they're like, where is my nice user-friendly software that I can just use that looks like it's easy? And I think there's a huge amount of upside for people. Also, it's not only that we have the ability to like I don't want to slot into existing workflows exactly. I actually want to make their workflows much easier.
Yeah.
That's actually, yeah.
We had to develop a whole bunch of automated QA/QC tools just to deal with the human error that's caused by inputting clinical data into spreadsheets.
Yeah, right? I can imagine. Yep.
Yeah. Anyway, all right, listen, I've borrowed a lot of your time today. General last question, because you, like you said, you've been doing this since before AI was cool and certainly before it was appreciated what a transformative effect it would have in healthcare. Just some parting thoughts on how you've seen the state of play change, where you see it going, and, when Unlearn has achieved its mission, when you're ready for your next big challenge, how will healthcare have changed?
Maybe I kind of approach that question two ways. So first, just with AI, I started, I guess, working, I didn't call it AI at the time, but I started working on machine learning related problems in probably, I guess since 2006, it's kind of like my field. And so, man, it's moved way faster than I thought it was. It has moved way faster than I thought it would. And I don't believe in the scaling laws and the scaling hypothesis and that these things are going to get us to AGI. I think that there are fundamental aspects of the algorithm of true intelligence that are missing. But I have my own ideas on how we could fix those problems. I think that will fix them. So I do think that AGI is probably a 10 to 20 year problem. I think it's coming. So from that standpoint, I think that's really interesting. We're not there today and we do need some research breakthroughs, but I think we'll get them. So then let's turn to the healthcare space, where the adoption of AI is incredibly slow. And people still are like, even right now, people are just start being like, oh, maybe our company needs an AI strategy. Let's go hire McKinsey and they're going to help us come in and create an AI strategy because they're the AI experts, And it's like the whole space is completely backwards and like way behind. So healthcare is an interesting one. I mean, with the pharma space, my prediction would be that the big pharma companies of today are unlikely to be the big pharma companies 25 years from now. I think that they're going to get disrupted, and I'm kind of much more bullish on AI first, like pharma companies like Recursion or something like that are like really truly saying we're going to build an AI first pharma company. There's a variety of them. I don't know who's going to win and end up becoming successful, but I'm much more bullish on that than I am on these big pharma companies making the type of switch. So I think that what's going to happen is we're going to get AGI, going to transform like every aspect, and we're going to see huge resistance actually from an entire medical community that's behind the curve. That's what I think. I think it's going to be like the longshoremen strike, where they were like, if you try to automate what we do, we'll shut down the whole country. And it's like, I think doctors are going to do that effectively, in that we're going to have this period where we could have been saving everybody's lives. We could have been using AI to really drive adoption. We could have been developing a bunch of drugs, but these people who are the old guard are going to resist. And it's going to be a period of like 10 or 20 years of really big friction. And then we'll see a big transformation after that. That's my controversial prediction, I think.
Very interesting. And, it may be doctors as the longshoremen, but it might also be, for example, your insurance agents, right? So like we have a sick care system that's really profitable.
It's funny, actually. I think a lot of the tools doctors would love to adopt. The thing is, when I think about medicine, is that I think that the future of medicine, maybe stepping back from the research space, gets much more human, right? Because today, doctors actually don't get to spend much time with their patients. That's why there's huge burnout. They spend all of their time entering stuff into charts and dealing with the EMR and doing all this stuff. And so if you are able to automate kind of all of that stuff, and even you might automate a lot of the diagnostics, a lot of the testing, a lot of these things, you're probably not automating, at least not within the next 50 years, I think, the actual patient interaction, like a person who's going to go there and like talk to the patient, talk to their families, and you end up probably looking more where that face-to-face, actually interpersonal, empathetic interaction, it belongs to the people, and the information processing belongs to AI, which honestly is probably better for everybody. If we can, as quickly as we can get to that future, I think the better.
Well, I like your vision, and if I had to bet on anyone's controversial takes, it would probably be yours. They've been pretty good so far. Charles Fisher, Unlearn.AI, thanks so much for chatting with me today. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
This has been another episode of the Talking Precision Medicine podcast, brought to you by Genialis. Hopefully by now you've subscribed to the show, but if not, go ahead and click that subscribe button and leave us a review. And please do pay us a visit at www.genialis.com. That's www.genialis.com to learn more about how AI is transforming precision medicine. Thanks for listening, and see you next time.